hppodcraft.com.
No. Yes. All right.
It was the design of Angelo Ricci, Joe Zanuck, and Manuel Silva to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea, and is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the profession of Messieurs Ricci, Zanuck, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery.
Yeah.
Man, people are taking stuff.
Yeah, it's a crime story.
Yeah, it is a crime story.
Yeah,
I like
man.
crime.
I do like crime.
I mean, not when it's perpetrated on me or anyone I know.
Right, but I like reading about it as it pertains to old men.
It's pretty exciting.
That was an excerpt, the first paragraph actually, of The Terrible Old Man, which is the story we're covering this week.
And we?
We, meaning myself, Chad Pfeiffer.
And myself, Chris Lackey.
And this is the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
hppodcraft.com.
That excerpt from The Terrible Old Man was read by a very talented young man, Mr. Douglas Surine.
Now I believe Doug is one of the perpetrators of that fine show Ask a Ninja.
That's right. If you are familiar with the internet, then you probably have heard of Ask a Ninja, and Doug is actually the ninja.
Doug is the ninja.
He is the ninja.
I could never tell. He's the ninja's masked, so his identity is secret. I
thought. I was secret until today.
Oh, wow.
I think I just blew some people's minds.
Mine?
Thinking about old people in crime, it reminded me of that movie Dog Bites Man. You remember that?
I do remember that movie.
It's like a French
that's a good one.
faux documentary, and I remember it's about a serial killer, and at one point he goes into a woman's apartment to rob her, and he looks at her medication and realizes that she has a heart condition, so he kills her by screaming in her ear, surprising her. Well, that's the lowest form of human being to do that to somebody, you know. And clearly these immigrants that are talked about in the first paragraph.
I was going to get to that.
Yeah, they're just that kind of person.
I was going to get to that. Well, let's just talk about the story. So it starts off, there are these three guys, and they got their sights set on this old man.
Yeah.
This old guy lives by himself. Supposedly he's rich and feeble.
Yeah, rich and feeble.
Which sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a
if
great
you're a
combination.
criminal, that's the target you want.
That's what you want. And he lives in Kingsport.
Yes. Now, this is the first time Kingsport is mentioned in any of Lovecraft's works, so this is kind of a hallmark. In fact, this is his first fictional city that he's made.
So you mean the address of this city is in Lovecraft's mind?
It is. It is.
And now in our hearts.
This is the first one, though. You know, this is before Innsmouth. This is before Arkham, even. This is, you know.
That's pretty cool.
So it's the first one.
The first time that he begins making this phony New England geography that a lot of his stories are set in. And so our three criminals have their sights set on this old man. But what is it that makes him terrible? I don't understand.
Well, he kind of keeps to himself, and the neighborhood kids they don't care much for him. So they throw rocks and things at him, but they hear stories about him. That he used to be a sailor.
Ah, right. He used to be a captain of East India clipper ships.
That's right.
Yeah,
indeed. And supposedly people would see him, like they would look into his window, and he does strange, queer things.
These folks say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, in each a small piece of lead, suspended pendulum-wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis. And that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations, as if in answer.
It's almost like a precursor to Whisper in Darkness, actually, because maybe in these bottles there's the spirit or soul or mind or something of these people.
Yeah, absolutely.
These discoursing. It also reminded me a bit of Bride of Frankenstein, the movie.
Yeah.
The James Whale movie, because Dr. Pretorius, who's sort of the other mad doctor in that movie, has a collection of little bottles that he shows off that have people in them.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And by the way, if anybody hasn't seen Bride of Frankenstein in a while, go check it out, because that's one of the coolest scenes. He's got a little king and a little queen, and they're in these little bottles, and the visual effects are actually quite good, you know, for the time.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that, but I do remember that when I was a kid.
And also, he's got out in his front yard, he's got some big stones that are arranged in some strange way.
They say they're oddly grouped and painted as some like obscure Eastern temple.
Oh my goodness, it's like a little Blair Witch Project stuff going on. out there.
Yeah, could be a little Blair Witch action going on there. And the kids, that's what I like. These kids, the bigger kids stay away from him because they've heard the stories, but the little kids just think he's creepy, so they throw rocks in this window and break stuff.
Yeah, and they run away. But the people that have been able to look in the windows, they see him talking to the bottles in there, and they don't like that.
No.
In fact, it says
those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations, do not watch him again. But Angelo Ricci, Joe Zanuck, and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were of that new, heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions. And they saw the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless graybeard, who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane, and whose thin, weak hands shook pitifully.
I'm wondering if this terrible old man is Gandalf.
Perhaps.
It could be.
Yeah.
That description sounds a little bit like Gandalf.
It does sound like Gandalf. An almost helpless gray beard, had his knotted cane.
Yeah.
I like how his weak hands shook pitifully. If these were like respectful, good blue-blooded New England types, they would, they'd revere this old man.
Oh yeah.
But because they're immigrant stock, they just look at his hands and they're disgusted because they're evil.
Those Portuguese.
Is that what are they Portuguese?
Well, yeah, I was gonna. One is Italian, one is Portuguese,
it's Christina
and one is
Ricci.
Polish.
Wait, really? You know that? So one.
I do know that. That was it was gonna be in one of my notes. I was talking about.
So we'll skip it. So these are bad guys, but maybe they're not totally bad. It says
they were really quite sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow whom everybody shunned and at whom all the dogs barked singularly.
Well, they do have enough sympathy. Like, look at the dogs keep barking at that guy.
That guy has it rough.
Yeah,
it's a shame we got to rob him.
It's a shame we got to break his old skull in and take his money. And I love this.
But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there is a lure and a challenge about a very old and very feeble man who has no account at the bank, and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago.
What? Yeah, this guy somehow manages to go down. That would be like I go to the Rite Aid and I don't have any cash on me, but here's 20 doubloons. Give me my saline solution.
Well, I guess they're...
I just don't think it would work. In Kingsport, I suppose.
I guess in Kingsport, people are a little bit more liberal with what's legal tender there,
But I like how he
says...
balloons. I love that he says, to these guys, business is business.
Oh, yeah.
It totally reminds me of The Wire or The Shield. Or actually, I was just watching Training Day on TBS the other day, and some goons, they beat up on Ethan Hawke, and then they realize he's actually not that bad of a guy, and the guy's like, sorry, Holmes, it's just business. You have to accept that, when you're in the game.
Yeah.
It's just business, man.
It's business. It's nothing personal.
I'm going to say it. I think that Lovecraft created the modern cop genre.
He probably did. Yeah, he was definitely the one.
Right in that paragraph.
So anyway, these guys, they got a plan. They got a heist plan.
Yeah, they picked April 11th.
April 11th, which I try to find if there was any significance to Lovecraft, and none. I couldn't find out. I think he just arbitrarily picked it, as far as I can tell.
Give it a sense of realism.
Yeah, there you go.
And they decided that one guy is going to wait on the car. He's going to be the wheelman, see? And the other two are going to go up to the door and, I don't know, get him to open it up and go in there and...
Yeah. Yeah, well, Lovecraft uses the term, he says, we're to interview the poor old gentleman.
Right.
Which threw me off, because I thought that they were going to... When I first read it, I thought it was like they were going to pretend to be meter men or something and try and ask him some questions. But what he means in this, when he says interviews, they're going to get in there and go, where do you keep your doubloons, old man?
Right, yeah. It confused me, too. I mean, I thought maybe they were going to pretend to be Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or something and get inside.
No.
But no, they're talking about interview with sap,
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to make him squeal.
They feared it might be unpleasant work, making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver. For aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse.
So they're worried, actually, maybe what they're worried about is like, look, I met some sea captains. Some of these guys like to get smacked around. If we go in there and start beating on the old man, we might get the opposite effect. He might,
Right.
he might make us dessert.
He just gives a little. He bats his eyes.
Yeah, he'll give us 5 doubloons. We want the whole thing.
We want all the doubloons.
Immediately, of course, whenever they talk about him being an old sea captain, I think of either Quint from Jaws or the sea captain from The Simpsons.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah,
Exactly.
the sea captain from The Simpsons.
He's the terrible old man.
But so the plan is 2 of them, Ricky and Sylvia, go in,
Right.
and
They're experienced at making unwilling persons voluble, it says. So
Yeah.
They've
so
got
they beat up
info.
some folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they beat up some folks. These are not. These aren't the kind of guys you want your sister dating.
No, not at all.
These are bad dudes.
Yeah, they're bad. So they decide to execute this plan.
Yes.
And the wheelman goes out there and parks. The other 2 go up.
Yeah, he parks in the back.
Right.
Yeah, and there's this gate. So the 2 guys go into the gate.
So they moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door.
That sentence kind of cracked me up because he's talking childishly to the bottles with pendulums.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
That's just creepy is what that
New
is.
bottles are my bestest friends.
Or maybe he was talking a little kid voice to him. That makes it even creepier.
Let's read Tiger Beat. Also, that I think it's funny that they don their masks and they got all psyched up to go on and beat this guy. Then they knock politely on the door. Knock, knock. I'm sure that they're ski masks or nylons. Well, they're probably not nylons.
No, they don't.
Of course, in my head, I imagine domino masks right away, like the Lone Ranger.
Oh, no, I thought of ski masks. Even though I don't know how much skiing they actually did. And when was the ski mask invented? Did people have ski masks in the
I don't know. They could be wearing Mardi Gras masks.
They could be.
Or maybe, maybe they're wearing some dead president masks. Maybe they got like Teddy Roosevelt masks on or something like that. That would be
James
cool.
Buchanan mask.
Yeah. No, I'm going to be Polk. Well, so our wheelman's in the back, and, all he knows is they go around, they knock politely, and then that's the end of things for him.
Yeah.
He starts, he's back there waiting.
Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Zanuck as he fidgeted restlessly in the covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the deed. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously he watched that narrow oaken gate in the high and ivy-clad stone wall. Frequently he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his treasure was hidden, and had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Zanuck did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place.
It's very Lovecraft, too sensitive to participate. Got to wait outside and watch by himself.
Yep.
It actually reminded me of our last story, Statement of Randolph Carter, where the guy's left out there to wonder what's going on, and he gets creeped out.
Yeah, doesn't know what's going on.
Pondering.
It's that's kind of what horror is about. It's about that, you don't have control over what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a spectator or a victim.
And there's something going on, but you don't know what it is.
Exactly.
It's unknown.
It's unknown, so therefore you have no control over it.
Right.
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
Then he sensed a soft tread or tapping on the walk inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of that sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man, leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Zanuck had never before noticed the color of that man's eyes. Now he saw that they were yellow.
Yellow eyes.
Pretty creepy.
It is pretty creepy.
Pretty creepy.
Do you remember? I think you pointed this out to me. Actually, this was a long time ago. They had a PSA billboard for hepatitis.
Yes.
And this made me think of that immediately. And it was like a bunch of like punks and teens.
Yeah, like good-looking teens.
Yeah.
They're like, kind of rough, kind of cool.
Right.
But they had yellow eyes.
They had they had like jaundiced yellow
Jaundiced eyes,
eyes,
yeah.
and it was an anti-PSA, but it totally didn't work.
No, they look like cool werewolves.
Exactly, they
Yeah.
look like some kind of cyberpunk werewolves or something. I was like, where do I get this hepatitis? That's so cool. But it would be pretty scary, I guess, if he had yellow. I imagine that they're very yellow eyes.
Oh, right. And I didn't think they were like jaundices. Like,
No.
the iris of his eye is, colored yellow and
Oh.
kind of luminescent.
That's pretty scary, man.
And just, he's in trouble.
Yeah.
But now the turn that happens, it's kind of a cut. At that point, there's
Mm-hmm.
a cut. He sees the old man, he gets scared. It's like, what happened to my buddies? Cut to, we're talking about Kingsport. There's some hubbub going on in the
Yeah.
city. It's the next day. What's happening?
Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason the Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentified bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses, and horribly mangled as if by the tread of many cruel boot heels which the tide had washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in Ship Street, or certain especially inhuman cries, probably a stray animal or a migratory bird, heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village gossip, the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in far-off days of his unremembered youth.
Wow, man. That's the end of the story right
That's
there.
it. That is the end. And a cool ending. That's a little different. No italicized
No.
sentence at the end. It's kind of a little bit of an epilogue, really.
Yeah,
It's like-
he held the revelation away. I mean, I guess the old man being alive and having yellow eyes is in a way the revelation, but he still doesn't expose anything. There's not,
No. No. And everybody talks about these bodies that showed up, but nobody thinks to ask the old man about it. He doesn't inquire about
Why
it.
would he's feeble.
He's feeble. He has nothing to do with
Right.
3 dudes turning out. Man, it's pretty creepy.
They were they were all cut up and sawed apart by cutlasses.
yeah,
Was this some kind of sailor spirits that did this, or
could be.
yeah?
Could be some like that. Well, I mean, I think the implication is that like he had, like pirate ghosts or something
Yeah.
like that. Like the names that he gives earlier on, they're
Yeah, like one is mate something. Maybe.
yeah, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe. I mean, they sound like pirates.
Yeah.
Like somehow he got pirate souls and he controls them, or they're his buddies. And,
Yeah, I think these are his buddies, and for some reason he's got an unnaturally long life, maybe. And
Oh, right, yeah. That's one of the cool things in the story. They say that nobody remembers him being young. Like, nobody alive remembers him ever being young. It's like, yeah, that's cool.
it is cool. I gotta say, I like this
Oh, yeah.
story.
This story's really... And it's very short, but, I
Right.
mean, pound per pound, you're getting prime stuff. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing's wasted in this.
Yeah,
Like,
it's cool. It's some criminals getting their just ends. Last week in the last podcast, Andrew had said that the statement of Randolph Carter was less of a story, more of an episode. I think this is like that as well.
Right.
It's an episode, and I'm okay with that.
Oh, yeah.
I think all these little episodes, they add up to one larger worldview that Lovecraft created, which
Oh,
is what makes the
absolutely.
whole canon kind of attractive, not just the individual stories.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's something that throughout his writing career that Lovecraft did. I mean, not many of the writers that I pick. I mean, like Stephen King or any of these guys. They don't really have worlds that they set their stuff in. They tell a story.
Well, now you're correct. That
Yeah.
however, Stephen King does do something that Lovecraft does in this story, which is he has a whole New England system of towns that he created, like Castle Rock,
Right.
that his stories happen in and that he references, and sometimes characters from I think like Dick Hallorann from The Shining shows up in The Thing, so he does have some of that continuity.
In The Thing?
I'm sorry, not The Thing. It.
Oh, in It. Really? I didn't know there was...
Yeah, there's little crossovers.
There's a character from The Shining that shows up in It.
When somebody is recounting something that happened, they actually were with Dick Hallorann from The Shining in that incident. And there's little tiny things like that he does.
I did not know that.
That are
Oh,
the same
that's-
thing. Well, it's just like I think the Terrible Old Man. I don't know. I think he shows up in another story.
He
or
does.
something.
A matter of fact, he shows up in The Strange House in the Mist. And he's a little bit more benevolent in that story.
Oh right.
Yep.
Oh wait, he lives up in a room, and there's some knocking on the window or something like that.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get.
Oh,
to
yeah,
that.
you're right. Okay,
we'll get to that.
I completely forgot about
yeah.
that. The Strange High House in the Mist, right? Mm-hmm. I gotta say, I do really personally enjoy elderly characters, and for me, it's because I find them more interesting. A, because they've had more history on the planet, they've been through more things, they've got more, pathos because of all of their experiences,
yeah.
and also because they're incredibly flawed and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Which inherently makes a character more interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So if I see a 20-year-old stocky guy, that looks like Brad Pitt get into a boxing ring, okay, he's probably got a pretty good chance.
Right.
But if I see an old guy get in there, he's got a fake hip and he's facing off against him, I'm really worried about him. Now it's a story. What's going to happen?
That's true.
He's challenged. Since we're on the subject of old men, my favorite terrible old man, Lo Pan.
Lo Pan's pretty awesome.
From
dude.
Big Trouble in Little China.
Big Trouble in Little China.
I think he's my favorite terrible old man. I was just trying to think, what are some other terrible old men I like? I was like, Mr. Burns.
Mr. Burns is pretty terrible.
John McCain, but
no.
Lo Pan.
Poor John McCain.
I know. So can you tell me anything about the background of the story?
I can. I tell you quite a bit about the background of the story. It was written on January. We have a date.
Oh,
January
great.
28th. 1920, and was first published in The Tryout, an amateur press publication, in July of 1921. There's one thing I wanted to mention about it, about Dunsany, again. There is a Dunsany tale in Book of Wonder called Probable Adventure of Three Literary Men. I read it, and it takes place in kind of a magical land, but it's about these guys that are going to rob a dude, and then they kind of flip out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But they're from magical pretend lands, so it's more weird and stuff. But in the end, bad stuff befalls them. Oh. And that story was written in 1912. So people, think
you read that, and
and it kind of inspired this. But from that is much, in my opinion, different than this. And I read that. It's very short. It's only like a page or two, the Dunsany Tale, and it's just wacky and really hard to read, in my opinion. Really strange. Just like all these weird names and weird places that these people were from, and like Zubala and
right.
Chokata.
Hey, we know that Lovecraft likes that kind of stuff.
Well, he does, but I mean, man, that's Dunsany for you.
Right.
For you. Lovecraft scholar Peter Cannon described the story as little more than a polemic against the intrusion of people he regarded as foreigners. That is, the non-English immigrants who came in the 19th century as cheap labor to fill factories of an increasingly industrialized America.
Right.
And that's the names of those three guys are, one of them is an Italian name, one of them is a Polish name, and one is a Portuguese name,
right.
which happened to be at that time, there were a lot of immigrants coming over from those countries.
Lots of vowels at the end of the name.
Yes, looking for work, and Lovecraft, once again, showing his...
A little xenophobic.
His xenophobia shining through in this, going, you know what? These people are criminals, and, they're going to get what they deserve.
Yeah. If they mess with all these proud old New England wizards. Knocked on the wrong door, foreigners.
And as I said at the top of the podcast, Kingsport, which is a fictionalized city, Lovecraft mentioned in one of his letters that he had based it off Marblehead, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of, if you've ever been there, which I haven't, that's kind of what Kingsport is supposed to be like. All
right, cool. This kind of fear of European immigrants was kind of in the air at the time. The Sacco and Vanzetti trial, I think, was around this time.
1921. Yeah.
So a little after this, but, it was a widely held fear in America.
It was definitely the climate for that.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're going with that.
I don't either, but just mentioning it's good enough. So what else was going on around the time this story was written?
Well, yeah, that's something that...
1920, right?
Yes, it was written in 1920, and earlier, just months before, the year before, because his story was written in January, so it's the beginning of the year.
Okay.
His mother was institutionalized.
His mother was institutionalized before he wrote the story?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, I mean, all of these stories, these 1920, the last story that we read before this, too, was also written in there.
He didn't have siblings.
No.
Right?
No.
And his world was one in which he was living among people who were much older than him all the time. Yeah. His grandfather, by this point, had already passed away, and his mother gets institutionalized, so he's living with these aunts who are, elderly. Mm-hmm. And he's a grown man, and it's a little odd. Well, actually, at this point, he was living at home with his aunts, right? So I imagine that sometimes the way that he reflects on age, or his particular obsession with age and decay, and it's almost as if evil is nested in things when they get very old, in his writing.
Right, yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's some reflection on the world that he lives in, and Although that contrasts weirdly with the way that he presented himself as this old person way before his time. I mean, it was as if he felt like he was 80 years old when he was in his early 30s.
Yeah, I think that also probably had a lot to do with him growing up and his peers. I mean, from what I've read, it doesn't sound like he played with a lot of kids when he was young. He stayed at home and did his own thing. Like when he went out in the woods and made his little temples and hung out with his wood nymphs and things like that, or his dryads, excuse me. You know, he did that stuff on his own. Yeah. You know, he would read these books and then have his little adventures and stuff like that. I'm sure that, you know, he matured fast because he spent a lot of time with adults and he probably always felt older. And that's the end of my armchair psychology for the day. But, you know, one of the things I was thinking about, too, is, you know, I always thought Robert E. Howard is like a contemporary of his.
Oh, no, he was a much younger man than him.
He is. In fact, at this point, Robert E. Howard was only 14 years old.
Right.
So
and, well, Robert Bloch as well was just a teenager when he was talking to H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that for some reason, I thought they were like the same age and they were peers. But Lovecraft is 30 at this point.
Yeah.
So, or almost 30. Yeah, his birthday isn't yet. But
I think that's so cool that he was encouraging younger writers. So many people do not have an appreciation for the next generation because they're threatened by them.
Yeah,
older artists, they just don't like these kids. People in general are always bashing kids, which drives me nuts. But I think it's so cool that he supported these young writers.
Absolutely.
And they gave back just as much. You know, they were clearly interested in his work as well.
Well, I mean that's kind of cool. Like, there's sort of a cosmic justice to it. Like, the fact that he did this cool thing and nurtured these young artists, that they kind of venerated him. And,
yeah, sure.
You know, August Derleth, if it wasn't for him, I would know who H.P. Lovecraft was.
Right.
Or is. By doing that, by, you know, seeding the next generation, he kind of, in a sense, you know...
Was a wonderful old man.
But, you know, also at this time period, there's a few other things. These are some little note tidbits I wanted to throw out there.
Feed them to me.
Paint a picture. Paint a picture.
I'm going to look at it.
Babe Ruth, this month, the month that this story was written, was traded to the Red Sox.
Shut up.
It's true. This happened before he wrote the story. So maybe... The terrible old man was Babe Ruth.
Oh my God!
I just thrown that out there. I don't know if that's true, but it's a theory I'm working on.
I just peed a little.
Also, this is right after
kind of a nervous
the
laugh.
Story. This is my apartment that we're recording in. I would have to clean it up. Yeah. Also, this is right after Prohibition took effect. The 18th Amendment of the Constitution.
Right.
Which was on the 20th of January.
That's why the old man's hands were shaking.
Yeah, no booze.
Yeah, he couldn't get his hooch. Panther sweat was gone.
Another little news tidbit of 1920. Good old George Polly. Do you remember George Polly?
I don't know. I don't.
He was known as the Human Fly.
Oh my gosh!
He climbed the New York Woolworth building and got busted for it. He made it all the way up to the 30th floor, before he was arrested.
Wow, he's like that French Spider-Man guy that does that now.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh wow! So there's always been some
dude that's been climbing buildings.
Yeah, some insect-human hybrid that's been fascinating the populace by endangering their own lives.
I don't know why he got called the Human Fly. I mean, I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but why? Because flies fly. He's just climbing something, you know. And I would think a spider would be way more appropriate.
Maybe he threw up on his own food. You know? Maybe it has nothing to do with this climbing. It's called the Human Fly for totally different reasons.
Oh, golly. And then the other big deal, Turkey gave up the Ottoman Empire. This is like when the Ottoman Empire finally, and all the little satellite areas. You know,
it's a very big deal.
Yeah.
I think that generally when people think about Lovecraft stories, that they think of that age and that time, and you know, I know part of the attraction of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game is that it's set in that really vibrant decade when fashion was so individual and crazy, and right before that stock market crash, so everybody was just spending their credit and living on the high horse, and there were all the speakeasies, and obviously organized crime was flourishing because of Prohibition, and it's such an interesting time period. I hope that we get more of an opportunity to explore it as we read more of these stories.
I hope so too. So what do we have next week, Chad?
We are doing 2 stories next week.
Because... Whoa.
Yeah.
2 stories in one podcast?
You know what? It's time for a double feature here at the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast. We are doing The Tree.
Oh, yes.
Which some of our listeners have already expressed intense interest in.
Yeah, excitement.
And then we're doing The Cats of Ulthar. Or Ulthar. Depending on what part of the United States you're from.
I always Althar is how I say
Althar?
it. Yeah. I don't know, though. It's again,
In the East, they say Althar, and out here in California, they say Ulthar.
Althar.
Yeah, it's just the way it's always been. Anyway, we're going to do The Tree and the Cats of Ulthar together, double feature.
Yeah.
They're both very short, so, you know, you can read them on the crapper. You can read
Yeah.
them during lunch.
You could easily read them both on the crapper.
Yeah.
One of them, even if you got diarrhea, you could read it.
Well, that's all I've got this week.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or fortunately.
Fortunately, that's
Fortunately,
all
that's
we've got.
all I have, too.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
and I'm Chris Lackey.
This has been the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
HPPodcraft.com.
Good night.
hppodcraft.com.